Good morning. Today we are starting with chapter 14, Respiration in Plants. Respiration is an energy releasing enzyme controlled catabolic process which involves a stepwise oxidative breakdown of food substances inside the living cells. So the topics to be covered in this chapter are: do plants breathe, glycolysis, fermentation, aerobic respiration, respiratory balance sheet, amphibolic pathway, and respiratory quotient. All living organisms, they require energy for all activities like absorption, movement, reproduction, or even breathing. So energy required is obtained from the oxidation of food during respiration. So the oxidation of some macromolecules of the food that takes place, and all the food that is respired for the life processes, it comes from photosynthesis. So cellular respiration is the mechanism of breakdown of the food material within the cells to release energy for the synthesis of ATP. So this is a complete definition of cellular respiration, that is the mechanism of breakdown of food material within the cells to release energy and the trapping of this energy for the synthesis of ATP. Now the breakdown of the complex molecules takes place to produce energy in the cytoplasm as well as in the mitochondria. So breakdown of the carbon-carbon bonds of the complex compounds through the oxidation within the cells results in the release of energy, and that is called as respiration. Now the compounds that get oxidized, they are called as respiratory substrates. So what are respiratory substrates? These are the compounds which get oxidized during respiration. And the energy released during oxidation is not used directly, but it is utilized in the synthesis of ATP. ATP is called as the energy currencies of the cells. So the process of respiration requires oxygen, and in plants oxygen is taken in by the stomata, lenticels, or root hair. Plants can get along without respiratory organs because each plant takes care of its own gas exchange needs, and plants, they do not present great demand for the gas exchange. So do plants breathe? Plants, they require oxygen for respiration, and they also give out carbon dioxide. So plants, they do not they are generally, the process of respiration requires oxygen, but the plants take in oxygen through stomata, lenticels, and through root hairs. So the complete combustion of glucose produces carbon dioxide and water as the end products, and most of this is energy is given out in the form of heat, and these are several small steps. And oxygen that is utilized and carbon dioxide, water, energy are released as products of the respiration. So can you think of such situations and organisms where oxygen is not available? So there are conditions, there are some naturally occurring anaerobic places on the earth, at the bottom of the oceans, ocean vents, hot springs, extreme temperatures. These are called as facultative anaerobes, or anaerobic condition is obligate. So there are organisms which survive in such kind of environment also. Partially oxidized glucose without the help of oxygen. So this breakdown of glucose to pyruvic acid is called as glycolysis. So each plant takes care of its own gaseous exchange needs. Plants do not present great demand for gas exchange, and the distance that gases must diffuse in large plants is also not great. So during photosynthesis, we know that oxygen is released in the leaves and diffuses to other parts of the leaves, and during the process of respiration, oxygen is utilized and carbon dioxide and water are released along with energy molecules in the form of ATP. Glycolysis. Aerobic respiration. Respiration is basically of two types, aerobic and anaerobic. In aerobic respiration, we study glycolysis, Krebs cycle, and the terminal oxidation. So aerobic respiration is the enzymatically controlled release of energy in a stepwise catabolic process of complete oxidation of the organic food into carbon dioxide and water with oxygen acting as a terminal oxidant. So here you can see how the glycolysis happens. The scheme of glycolysis is given by Amden, Meyerhoff and Paranas. It is also called as EMP pathway. It is on the name of these three scientists. So glycolysis is the partial oxidation of glucose. You can see here partial oxidation of glucose or similar hexose sugar into two molecules of pyruvic acid through a series of enzyme mediated reactions releasing ATP and NADH2. So it occurs in the cytoplasm, and in plants glucose is derived from sucrose or from storage carbohydrate, and sucrose is converted into glucose and fructose by the enzyme invertase. So glycolysis starts with the phosphorylation of glucose in the presence of the enzyme hexokinase to form glucose 6-phosphate. One molecule of ATP is used in this process. So in the next steps, glucose 6-phosphate is converted into fructose 6-phosphate catalyzed by the enzyme phosphohexoisomerase. Fructose 6-phosphate uses another molecule of ATP to form fructose 1,6-diphosphate biphosphate in the presence of the enzyme phosphofructokinase. So in glycolysis, two molecules of ATP are consumed during double phosphorylation of glucose to fructose 1,6-biphosphate, and two molecules of NADH2 are formed at the time of oxidation of glyceraldehyde 3-phosphate to 1,3-diphosphoglycerate. So each NADH. So each two molecules of NADPH2, they are formed at the time of this process, that is the oxidation of glyceraldehyde 3-phosphate to 1,3-diphosphoglycerate, and each NADH is equivalent to 3 ATP. So the net gain of glycolysis is 8 ATP molecules. So pyruvic acid is the key product of glycolysis, and further breakdown of pyruvic acid results in depends upon the need of the cell. So in animals like mussels, during exercise when oxygen is insufficient for aerobic respiration, pyruvic acid is converted to lactic acid by the enzyme lactate dehydrogenase due to the reduction of NADH. So here then, when can we calculate how many ATP molecules are directly synthesized in this pathway from one glucose molecule? Now during glycolysis, total of 4 ATPs they are formed, out of which 2 are consumed. So 24 ATPs are directly formed during the glycolysis cycle by the 6 molecules of glucose. So one molecule of glucose which contains 6 carbon atoms releases 24 ATP molecules. So out of one carbon atom, for one carbon atom 4 ATPs they are formed, out of which 2 are consumed. So 6 molecules of glucose releases 24 ATP molecules at the end of glycolysis. Now glucose, when it is converted into glyceraldehyde 3-phosphate and then to 3-phosphoglyceric acid during the glycolysis, now it converted into pyruvic acid. Now pyruvic acid undergoes different depending on the situation. If the oxygen is insufficient for aerobic respiration, pyruvic acid reduced to lactic acid. So here the role of fermentation happens. In fermentation in yeast, pyruvic acid is converted to ethanol and carbon dioxide. Ethanol and carbon dioxide, they are formed, and the enzyme involved in pyruvic acid decarboxylase and alcohol dehydrogenase. So these are the enzymes which are involved during this reaction, which catalyzes this reaction. So in both lactic acid fermentation and alcoholic fermentation, very less amount of energy is released. So fermentation is a metabolic process where chemical changes in the organic substrates takes place, again through the action of the enzymes, and the science of fermentation is also known as zymology. So in microorganisms, fermentation is the primary means of producing ATP. by the degradation of the organic nutrients anaerobically, not with oxygen. So you can see here alcoholic fermentation as well as lactic acid fermentation. It happens in yeast and it is in the muscle cells. Here the final product is ethanol and here it is lactic acid. So yeast poison themselves to death if the concentration of the alcohol reaches above 13%. So final product of glycolysis, that is pyruvate, is transported from the cytoplasm into the mitochondria for the further breakdown. So oxidation of pyruvate to acetyl coenzyme A is done to produce carbon dioxide and NADH, and the reaction is catalyzed by pyruvic dehydrogenase, which requires the participation of several coenzymes including NAD. So acetyl coenzyme A now enters a cyclic pathway which is called as tricarboxylic acid cycle or the Krebs cycle, which we will be studying later on. First, what would be the maximum concentration of alcohol in the beverages that are naturally fermented? Now, the maximum concentration of alcohol in naturally fermented beverages is 15 to 16%. Why? Because higher level of alcohol, it becomes toxic to the yeast and the yeast can die. So, therefore, alcoholic concentration, if it is greater than this limit, it has to be added by fortifying or by adding more concentration of alcohol through distillation.